I never thought the most painful words of my life would be spoken at my own dinner table, from my own son's mouth, during the Sunday dinner I had prepared myself for 35 years. Subscribe now, because this story has a twist you will never see coming. My name is Emily Herrera. I am 67 years old, and for my entire life, I believed I had built something solid, a united family, a home full of love, and a legacy to be proud of. That night, Sunday, March 15th, 2024, my world collapsed with a single sentence. It was a Sunday, just like any other. I had prepared the pot roast that my son Daniel had loved so much since he was a little boy. My husband David had set the table with the embroidered tablecloth we inherited from my mother, and my daughter-in-law Sarah had brought dessert from the neighborhood bakery. Everything seemed perfect, just as we had always tried to make it. Daniel, my only son, now 35, arrived that afternoon with a strange expression. I noticed it from the moment he walked through the door. It wasn't his usual smile, the one that used to light up the whole house when he was a child. There was something cold in his eyes, something I had never seen before in all these years. During dinner, the conversation was forced. David commented on the weather, Sarah talked about her job at the real estate agency, but Daniel remained silent, just pushing the food around on his plate without barely tasting it. I tried to keep the atmosphere cheerful, as I had always done, telling stories from the week, asking about their plans. It was when I was serving the second course that it happened. Daniel dropped his fork on the plate with a metallic clang that echoed through the kitchen. He looked me straight in the eyes, and with a coldness I had never heard in his voice, he said, "Mom, you're here because it's your house, but not because you're welcome." The silence that followed was deafening. David froze with the spoon halfway to his mouth. Sarah looked down at her plate, and I felt as if a dagger had been stabbed into my chest. "What did you say?" I managed to murmur, thinking I had misheard, that my 6-7-year-old ears had played a trick on me. "You heard me," Daniel replied without blinking. "This house is technically yours, yes, but that doesn't mean your presence is wanted here." I tried to process those words. This was the same little boy who used to run to me when I came home from work, the same one who asked me to read him stories before bed, the same one who called me his hero when he had problems at school. How was it possible that this same boy, now a man, was telling me I wasn't welcome in my own home? "Daniel," David intervened, his voice trembling, "don't talk to your mother like that." "No, Dad," he replied firmly. "It's time for things to be made clear. Mom needs to understand that things are going to change." My mind started racing. Change? What things were going to change, and why had no one consulted me about these supposed changes? I looked at David, searching for answers in his eyes, but he avoided my gaze. "What changes are you talking about, son?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though inside I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. "We'll discuss it later," was his only response before getting up from the table. "And Sarah, we're leaving." And just like that, without any more explanation, my son and daughter-in-law gathered their things and left, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with a plate of pot roast I could no longer swallow, and 1,000 unanswered questions. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had rocked Daniel to sleep as a baby, replaying every word, every gesture, every look from that cursed dinner over and over. Had I done something wrong? Had I said something that offended him? Why hadn't David defended our family more forcefully? But as the hours passed and dawn approached, something inside me began to change. The initial sadness gave way to a different feeling, the need to understand what was really happening. I had built a business from scratch. I had navigated economic crises. I had made tough decisions for decades. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself without looking for answers. At 6 a.m. on Monday, March 16th, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what was hidden behind those cruel words. My son had mentioned that things were going to change, and I needed to know exactly what that meant. As I prepared my morning coffee, my mind was already forming a plan. If I had learned anything in my 67 years of life, it was that answers don't just come to you. You have to go out and find them. Monday morning, after a sleepless night, I decided to confront David directly. I couldn't go on living with the uncertainty of what I had witnessed the night before. My husband of 42 years had to give me some explanations. I found him in the kitchen making breakfast as if nothing had happened. He was wearing that blue robe I liked so much, the same one he wore when we were young newlyweds. But now, watching him closely, I noticed something different in his movements. There was a tension in his shoulders, a stiffness that wasn't natural for him. "David," I said in a firm voice, "we need to talk." He didn't look up from the coffee maker. "About what, Emily?" "About what happened last night, about what our son said, and about why you didn't seem surprised." It was then that he stopped. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the cup on the counter. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, he turned to me, his eyes filled with tears. "I knew this moment would come," he murmured. "What moment, David? What are you talking about?" He sat in the chair across from me, the same one where he had fed Daniel when he was little, where we had shared thousands of happy breakfasts. But now that chair seemed miles away. "Emily, Daniel came to see me 3 weeks ago. He was very upset, talking about plans, about the future, about things I didn't want to hear." My heart started to beat faster. "What kind of plans?" He believes that we're too old to handle all of this now," he said, gesturing to encompass the house. "The mortgage is paid off, the savings are growing, and he says it would be better if what, David? Tell me clearly. If we divide the assets now, before it's too late." The words hit me like a hammer. Divide the assets? My son was planning to split up my estate while I was still alive and in perfect health? "And what did you say to him?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. David covered his face with his hands. At first, I flatly refused. I told him he was talking about his mother, that we had sacrificed our whole lives for him, that this house was our home. At first, but he insisted, Emily, day after day. He would call me in the mornings when you went for your walk. He would visit in the afternoons when you were at your workshop. He explained that it was nothing personal, that it was just the smartest thing to do from a financial standpoint. I felt like I was looking at a stranger. This man who had shared my bed for 4 decades had been hiding secret conversations with our son about my own future. "And Sarah?" I asked. "Is she involved in this too?" "Sarah was the one who had the idea initially," David confessed in a broken voice. "She works in real estate. She knows the market. She says this house is worth much more now than what we paid, that the neighborhood has appreciated enormously." Everything was starting to make sense in my mind. It wasn't just a tantrum from my son or a passing family crisis. It was a calculated plan, a financial strategy designed by my daughter-in-law and executed by my own son with the silent complicity of my husband. "How long have they been planning this?" I asked with the calmest voice I could muster. "Since January," he admitted. Sarah had Daniel consult with a lawyer specializing in inheritances. "Apparently, there are legal ways to advance the division of assets if all parties agree." "All parties?" I interrupted him. "And when was I going to find out that I was a party to this agreement?" "Daniel said he would explain it to you gradually, that he would make you see the advantages, that you could keep living here, but that legally the property would be divided among the 3 of us." The coldness of the whole plan left me breathless. Not only had they decided my future without consulting me, but they had designed a way to make it seem like it was for my own good. "And the savings? The retirement account? The investments I've been making for 30 years? David closed his eyes before answering. "Everything, Emily. The plan includes everything." I got up from the table. I needed to move, to think, to process this information. I walked to the window overlooking the garden, the same garden where I had taught Daniel to play soccer, where we had celebrated his birthdays, where David grew his favorite roses. "And you agree with all of this?" I asked without turning around. "I don't know, Emily. I'm confused. Daniel says it's for the best for everyone, that it avoids future problems, that it ensures I can't change my mind later." David's silence was all the answer I needed. "There's something else," he added in an almost inaudible voice. "Daniel mentioned that if you don't agree voluntarily, there are legal procedures." "Legal procedures?" "To declare a person incompetent to manage their own affairs." At that moment, I fully understood the magnitude of what I was facing. It wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a carefully orchestrated coup against my own life and autonomy. As I stood looking out the window, a strange calm came over me. For 67 years, I had built my reputation on being a thoughtful, analytical, and strategic woman. I was not going to let them underestimate me now. "Thank you for telling me the truth, David," I said finally, turning to him. "Now at least I know exactly where I stand." That afternoon, while David cried in the bedroom, I sat at my desk and started making a list of everything I needed to know. If my family wanted to play with legal and financial strategies, they would soon discover that they had gravely underestimated their opponent. The next few days were the most productive of my life in terms of gathering information. After 40 years working in the design industry, I had learned that details are crucial, and now that experience would become my best weapon. I started by reviewing all the financial documents I kept at my desk: bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, investment certificates. Everything was meticulously organized in folders I had kept updated for decades. But now I was examining them with different eyes, looking for any suspicious activity. It was on Wednesday, March 18th, that I made the first alarming discovery. On the February bank statement, there were 2 inquiries that I had not authorized. Someone had requested information about my checking and savings accounts. The dates coincided exactly with what David had confessed about Daniel's secret visits. I immediately called the bank. After identifying myself to the manager, Jacob Fisher, who had known me for 15 years, I was able to confirm my suspicions. "Mrs. Herrera," Jacob explained with some discomfort, "your son came here with a power of attorney signed by you. He needed information, supposedly, to help you with your tax return." "A power of attorney signed by me?" I asked, feeling my blood run cold. "Yes, ma'am." We verified the signature with our database, and it matched perfectly. I hung up the phone with a terrible certainty. My own signature had been forged. Daniel had gained access to confidential information through fraudulent documents. This was no longer just a family betrayal, it was a crime. That same afternoon, while David was out buying medication for his blood pressure, I decided to thoroughly search the study Daniel used when he came to visit. It was a small room at the end of the hall where we kept books and where he often worked on his laptop when he stayed for Sunday lunch. In the desk drawer, I found something that took my breath away. Photocopies of all my personal documents: passport, ID, house deeds, life insurance policies, even copies of medical receipts from my latest checkups. Everything was there, perfectly organized in a blue folder I didn't recognize. But the most disturbing part was on the last page, a handwritten draft in Daniel's writing. It was a detailed timeline that included specific dates and concrete actions. April: obtain independent medical evaluation. May: submit legal documentation. June: initial transfer of assets. July: final signature. My son had planned the next 4 months of my life without my knowledge. He had even set deadlines for each phase of his strategy. I photographed every document with my cell phone, being careful not to show they had been moved. If Daniel was documenting everything meticulously, I would do the same. On Thursday morning, I decided to dig deeper. I remembered Daniel had mentioned consulting with lawyers, so I checked the call history on our home phone. David had always insisted on keeping the landline for emergencies, and now I was glad for that decision. Among the calls made in recent weeks, I found several numbers I didn't recognize. Using an online directory, I identified that 2 of those numbers belonged to law firms specializing in family law and successions. Very cautiously, I called the first one, posing as a potential client interested in legal incapacitation processes. The secretary, suspecting nothing, explained that they had indeed had recent consultations about cases of elderly individuals requiring legal protection from their relatives. The second call was even more revealing. The lawyer, Robert Sanders, immediately recognized my last name when I introduced myself. "Oh, you must be Daniel Herrera's mother," he said without thinking. "Your son was here last week consulting about guardianship procedures." I hung up immediately, but I already had all the information I needed. My son had not only forged documents and collected my personal data, but he had also been specifically consulting on how to have me declared legally incompetent. That night, as we ate dinner in silence, I watched David closely. His movements were nervous. He avoided my gaze and barely touched his food. It was clear that the pressure of keeping the secret was affecting him deeply. "How was your day?" I asked normally, as if I hadn't discovered anything. "Fine, normal," he replied quickly. "I went to the market, then to the pharmacy." "Did Daniel call you today?" He tensed visibly. "No. Why do you ask?" "No particular reason. Just curious." But I knew he had called. I had seen the log on the phone, a 32-minute call at 2 in the afternoon, exactly when I had been out for my walk. On Friday, I decided to take a bolder step. I took advantage of David's weekly doctor's appointment to search the house completely. In the master bedroom, inside David's dresser, I found a small notebook hidden among his underwear. The notes were in his handwriting and documented phone conversations with Daniel over the last 5 weeks. There were specific dates, summaries of each call, and most shockingly, lists of my daily routines, my departure and arrival times, my medical appointments, even my moods. My own husband had been spying on me and reporting my activities to our son like an undercover agent. In the last entry, dated the previous day, I read something that chilled my blood. Daniel says he has everything ready. Next week he will talk to Mom directly. If she refuses, they will proceed with Plan B. He says there's no going back. I closed the notebook and left it exactly where I had found it. Now I had physical evidence of the entire conspiracy: forged documents, secret legal consultations, domestic espionage, and a specific timeline for future actions. As I returned to my desk, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. Throughout my life, I had faced complex professional challenges, navigated economic crises, made difficult decisions under pressure, but I had never faced anything that required so much of my strategic ability as this. My family had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed I was a helpless and predictable old woman. They were about to find out how wrong they were. That afternoon, I began to draft my own plan of action. If they had a timeline, I would have a better one. If they had consulted lawyers, I would consult better ones. If they thought they could manipulate me using my family love against me, they would learn that decades of experience in the business world had taught me to separate feelings from strategy when necessary. The war had begun, but they didn't know it yet. On Saturday, March 21st, I decided to expand my investigation beyond the confines of my home. If this conspiracy was as elaborate as it seemed, I needed to understand how far its tentacles reached and who else might be involved. My first stop was the office of my accountant, Frank Castle, who had managed my personal finances for the last 12 years. Frank was a meticulous and discreet man, qualities I had always valued, but now I needed to know if that discretion had been compromised. "Frank," I said directly as we sat in his office, "I need you to tell me with complete honesty if anyone from my family has been making inquiries about my financial affairs." His expression changed immediately. The discomfort on his face confirmed that my suspicions were justified. "Mrs. Herrera," he began nervously, "your daughter-in-law, Sarah, came to see me 3 weeks ago. She said you had sent her to get a summary of your financial situation. And what did you tell her?" "At first I refused, of course, but she insisted that you had signed an authorization. She even had a copy of your ID and knew specific details about your investments that only you could know." My stomach churned. Sarah had used the information Daniel had collected from my documents to convince my own accountant that she was acting with my consent. "What information did you provide her with exactly?" Frank loosened his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "I gave her a complete summary of your assets, the 2 properties, the bank accounts, the pension plan, the shares from the old company. Everything?" I asked, feeling the betrayal deepen. "Yes, ma'am. I also explained the structure of your investments and provided her with the updated valuations of each asset." I fell silent for a few moments, processing the magnitude of what I had just heard. Sarah not only had access to general information about my wealth, but she knew every detail of my financial situation with precise accuracy. Did she mention why she needed this information? She said they were planning a surprise for your birthday, something related to reorganizing your investments to optimize taxes. A reorganization of my investments. The irony was almost comical. My own money was being used to fund the plan that intended to take it all away from me. After leaving Frank's office, I decided to visit my primary care physician, Dr. Patrick Morgan, who had treated me for the last 8 years. If Daniel's plan included an independent medical evaluation, I needed to know if they had already taken steps in that direction. "Dr. Morgan," I said during what appeared to be a routine checkup, "have you received any calls from my family requesting information about my health status?" His reaction was immediate and concerning. "Actually, yes. Your son called last week asking about your cognitive ability and general state of health. And what did you tell him?" I explained that I couldn't provide medical information without your explicit authorization, of course. But he was very insistent, saying he was worried about some recent episodes of confusion you've supposedly had. "Episodes of confusion?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yes. He mentioned that lately you had been forgetting important conversations, repeating the same questions, and showing signs of temporal disorientation." The audacity of Daniel left me speechless. Not only was he gathering medical information about me, but he was fabricating non-existent symptoms to build a case of cognitive decline. "Doctor, you examined me just last month. Did you observe any signs of cognitive decline in me?" "Absolutely none, Mrs. Herrera. Your cognitive functions are perfectly normal for your age. In fact, your mental agility is superior to that of many patients 20 years younger." "Did you tell my son that?" I explained it to him clearly, but he insisted that perhaps I should refer you to a geriatric specialist for a more thorough evaluation. Now I fully understood the strategy. Daniel was systematically building a file to justify a declaration of incompetence. He had forged documents, gathered detailed financial information, consulted specialized lawyers, and now he was trying to establish a fictitious medical history. That afternoon, I decided to pay a surprise visit to the real estate agency where Sarah worked. I needed to personally assess the true architect of this plan. The office of Morales and Associates Properties was located in the city center, in a modern building that reflected the success of the local real estate business. When I arrived, the receptionist informed me that Sarah was with a client, but I could wait for her. While I waited, I overheard fragments of her conversation through the glass door of her office. She was talking on the phone, and although I couldn't make out all the words, I did catch a few phrases that chilled my blood. "The process is further along than we thought. The valuation of the main property is excellent. We should accelerate the timeline." When she finally came out to greet me, her surprised expression confirmed that my visit was neither expected nor welcome. "Emily," she said with a forced smile, "what a surprise to see you here." "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something important." I took her to a nearby cafe, where I decided to test the extent of her duplicity. For 20 minutes, I maintained a seemingly casual conversation about the real estate market, property prices in our neighborhood, and investment trends. Sarah responded with professional enthusiasm, providing specific details about valuations and market opportunities. But what struck me most was her precise knowledge of the exact features of my property: square footage, year of construction, improvements made, even details about the heating and electrical system that only someone who had meticulously studied the deed could know. "You've done very thorough research on the properties in the neighborhood," I commented casually. "It's my job," she replied, but she avoided my gaze. "You even know very specific details about my house." It was then that she became visibly nervous. "Well, it's one of the most iconic properties in the area. It's natural that I've studied it." Studied it for what exactly? The silence that followed was more eloquent than any confession. Sarah quickly excused herself, claiming an urgent appointment, and left the cafe, leaving me with the absolute certainty that she was indeed the mastermind behind the entire operation. That night, back at home, I sat at my desk and drew a mind map of the entire conspiracy. It was much broader and more sophisticated than I had initially imagined. Daniel was the emotional enforcer, using his filial relationship to manipulate the situation. Sarah was the financial strategist, providing technical knowledge and professional contacts. David was the inside informant, providing access and constant surveillance, and they had managed to infiltrate my circle of professional trust, compromising my accountant and trying to manipulate my doctor. But they had made a crucial mistake. They had completely underestimated my ability to detect, analyze, and respond to their strategy. During 40 years of business experience, I had faced ruthless competitors, disloyal partners, and complex crises. This situation, though personally painful, was no different in strategic terms. As I organized all the evidence I had gathered during the week, a sense of cold determination washed over me. It was no longer just about defending my assets or my autonomy. It was about teaching a fundamental lesson about the consequences of betraying the trust of someone who had dedicated her entire life to protecting and providing for her family. On Monday, the next phase of my investigation would begin, identifying allies and preparing my counteroffensive. On Monday, March 23rd, I decided it was time to transform my role from a silent victim to an active strategist. Over the weekend, I had meticulously analyzed all the information I had gathered, and now I needed trusted professionals to help me protect what I had built over decades. My first call was to Samuel Morris, a lawyer specializing in estate law whom I had met years ago at a conference on financial planning for retirees. Samuel had a reputation for being discreet, efficient, and absolutely loyal to his clients. "Mrs. Herrera," he greeted me when I arrived at his office that morning. "It's a pleasure to see you after so long. How can I help you?" I explained the entire situation without omitting any details. I showed him the photographs of the documents I had found, told him about Daniel's secret consultations with other lawyers, and detailed the timeline they had established without my knowledge. Samuel listened attentively, taking meticulous notes. His expression grew more serious with each revelation. "Mrs. Herrera," he said finally, "what you are describing constitutes several serious crimes: forgery of documents, fraudulent obtaining of confidential information, and most worryingly, preparation for an incapacitation process without any real medical basis. What are my options?" "Multiple. We can file criminal complaints, establish immediate protective orders to safeguard your assets, and most importantly, we can get ahead of any legal move they plan to make." Samuel explained that we could implement what he called a preventive asset shield. This included modifying the legal structure of my properties, establishing irrevocable trusts, and creating medical and psychological documentation certifying my full mental capacity. "How much time do we need?" I asked. "If we act quickly, we can have everything legally shielded within 2 weeks. They won't be able to touch anything without your explicit consent, even if they manage to get a temporary declaration of incompetence." I authorized him to proceed immediately with all protective measures. I also asked him to discreetly investigate the lawyers Daniel had consulted to anticipate their possible moves. My second stop was the office of clinical psychologist Mary Johnson, a specialist in geriatric evaluations. If Daniel planned to question my mental capacity, I needed irrefutable professional documentation that proved otherwise. "Dr. Johnson," I explained, "I need a complete psychological evaluation to certify my current cognitive state." For the next 3 hours, I underwent an exhaustive battery of tests: memory assessments, reasoning ability analysis, temporal and spatial orientation tests, and executive function exams. The results were categorical. My scores on all tests were significantly above average for my age group. Dr. Johnson assured me that I would have the full report in 2 days, with documentation that any court would consider definitive. That afternoon, I visited my sister Rebecca, 5 years my junior and the only person in the family I could completely trust. Rebecca had worked for 30 years as a judicial secretary and knew the legal system better than many lawyers. "Emily," she said after hearing the whole story, "this is much more serious than you imagine. If Daniel gets a declaration of incompetence, even a temporary one, he can make binding decisions about your estate before you can reverse the process. What do you recommend? You need to act on multiple fronts simultaneously: legal, financial, and family. But you also need evidence that they are acting in bad faith." Rebecca suggested something I hadn't considered: recording future conversations with Daniel and David. It was legal to do so in my own home and would provide irrefutable evidence of their real intentions. "You should also consider changing all your bank passwords and setting up new security protocols," she added. "If they've forged your signature once, they can do it again." On Tuesday, I went to my bank to meet personally with the general manager, Anthony Vega, with whom I had maintained a professional relationship for 15 years. "Anthony," I said directly, "someone has been accessing information from my accounts using forged documentation. I need to implement extraordinary security measures." Anthony took the matter very seriously. We established a special protocol where any inquiry or transaction related to my accounts would require direct phone verification with me, using security questions that only I knew. "Mrs. Herrera," he explained, "we can also temporarily freeze access to information on your accounts while we investigate how they previously obtained the data." Additionally, he suggested I open a new checking account at another branch, transfer most of my liquid savings there, and keep only minimal funds in the original accounts. On Wednesday, I received an unexpected call that completely changed my perspective on available allies. It was Hope Roberts, David's younger sister, calling from out of state. "Emily," she said with a worried voice, "David called me yesterday, very upset. He told me something about family problems and Daniel's plans that has me very concerned." "What exactly did he say?" "That Daniel is pressuring him to support some kind of legal procedure against you. He's very confused and scared, but he feels he can't go against his own son." This information was revealing. David was not an enthusiastic conspirator, but a victim of Daniel's emotional manipulation. This gave me a new perspective on how to handle the situation with my husband. "Hope, would you be willing to talk to David about this?" "Of course. In fact, I'm planning to visit you all next week." I might be able to help David see the situation from a different perspective. On Thursday, I completed the final element of my defensive strategy. I hired the services of a private investigator, Gabe Harrison, who specialized in family fraud cases. "Mrs. Herrera," Gabe explained, "we can investigate all recent activities of your son and daughter-in-law, phone calls, legal consultations, personal financial movements, even their digital communications if necessary." I authorized him to proceed with a discreet but thorough investigation. I needed to know exactly what other moves they had made and if they had additional accomplices I hadn't identified. That night, as I reviewed all the documents and contracts I had signed during the week, I realized I had achieved something fundamental. I had gone from being a vulnerable target to being someone protected by multiple layers of legal and financial defense. Samuel had started the asset shielding process. Dr. Johnson had certified my perfect mental capacity. Anthony had secured my financial resources. Rebecca was providing me with practical legal advice. Hope would become my ally in dealing with David. And Gabe was investigating my adversaries. But most importantly, I had regained something I had lost during those weeks of confusion and pain: absolute control of the situation. I was no longer reacting to others' moves, but anticipating them and setting my own rules for the game. On Friday night, as David slept restlessly beside me, I stayed awake planning my next steps. Daniel had mentioned in his timeline that April would be the month for the independent medical evaluation. But when that time came, he would find that I already had irrefutable medical documentation, complete legal protection, and solid evidence of all his fraudulent activities. The defensive phase of my strategy was complete. Now it was time to go on the offensive. On Monday, March 30th, I received news that would completely change the balance of power in this silent battle. Gabe Harrison, my private investigator, had uncovered information that surpassed my worst expectations. "Mrs. Herrera," he said when we met in his office, "you need to sit down for this." Gabe spread a series of photographs, bank statements, and phone transcripts across his desk, all obtained through completely legal methods. "Your daughter-in-law, Sarah, has been organizing this operation for longer than we imagined. We found evidence that she started researching your estate more than 6 months ago, long before your son was involved." He showed me screenshots of online searches Sarah had conducted on guardianship procedures for the elderly and early inheritance rights. The dates went back to September of the previous year. But most importantly, Gabe continued, we discovered that Sarah has significant debts she has hidden from her husband. What kind of debts? She invested heavily in a real estate project that completely failed. She owes more than $150,000 to several private investors. The payments were due in January, and the creditors are aggressively pressuring her. Everything fit perfectly. Sarah wasn't motivated by family concern or smart financial planning. She was desperate to settle debts that had put her own solvency at risk. "Does Daniel know about these debts?" I asked. "Apparently not. Our sources indicate that Sarah has managed to keep him completely in the dark about her real financial situation." Gabe then handed me the most shocking document, a transcribed phone conversation between Sarah and one of her creditors. "If I don't get access to those assets before May," Sarah had said, "I'll have to declare bankruptcy. My mother-in-law has properties worth over $500,000 that are practically sitting there. She's an old woman living alone with her husband, with no real ability to manage that wealth." Reading those words was like a punch to the gut. Sarah had turned my family, my home, and my estate into a simple business transaction to solve her own financial mistakes. "There's more," Gabe added. "Daniel isn't in the financial situation he appears to be in either. His consulting business has been losing clients for the last year. His income has dropped by almost 40%. The full picture was beginning to form in my mind. This wasn't a carefully thought-out plan for my well-being, but a desperate operation by two people with serious financial problems who had decided to use my estate as the solution to their personal crises. That afternoon, when I returned home, I found an unexpected surprise. My sister-in-law, Hope, had arrived from out of state, just as she had promised. She was sitting in the kitchen talking with David, and the tension between them was palpable. "Emily," Hope greeted me with obvious concern. "The three of us need to talk about what's happening in this family." For the next 2 hours, Hope put the pressure on David that I had been unable to apply. As his younger but more decisive sister, she managed to get David to confess details he had hidden from me. "Daniel told me that if I didn't cooperate, he and Sarah would move far away and I would never see my grandchildren," David admitted through tears. What grandchildren? Hope asked sharply. Daniel and Sarah don't have children. The ones they plan to have in the future, David mumbled. Daniel said they wanted to start a family, but they needed financial stability first. Hope and I exchanged meaningful glances. Daniel had used the promise of future grandchildren to emotionally manipulate his father, preying on his desire to be a grandfather. David, Hope said firmly, do you realize they are using your own dreams against you to steal your wife's inheritance? It was then that David completely broke down. Between sobs, he confessed that for weeks he had felt something was terribly wrong, but he had been afraid to contradict Daniel. I was also scared when Daniel mentioned they could have Emily declared incompetent, he whispered. I know her mind is perfectly fine, but he insisted it was just a precaution. Hope stood up from the table with an indignant expression. David, your son is planning to destroy his own mother's life to solve money problems. How can you even consider supporting something like that? During that crucial conversation, I gained something I hadn't expected. My husband back as an ally. David had been a victim of emotional manipulation, just as I had been a victim of financial deception. On Tuesday, I received a call from Samuel Morris that filled me with satisfaction. Mrs. Herrera, we have completed the entire asset shield. Your assets are now protected under a legal structure that makes any unauthorized access impossible. What does that mean exactly? It means that even if they managed to get a temporary declaration of incompetence, they couldn't touch any of your properties, bank accounts, or investments without going through a full judicial process that would take years. Samuel had also investigated the lawyers Daniel had consulted. They are good professionals, but they are working with incomplete and false information. When they discover that their client lied to them about your mental capacity and your real family situation, they will likely withdraw from the case. On Wednesday, I implemented the next phase of my strategy: controlled confrontation. It was time for Daniel to know that I knew exactly what he was planning, but without yet revealing the extent of my countermeasures. I called him on the phone with a calm voice. Daniel, I think we should have a serious conversation about the future. Could you come over to the house tomorrow afternoon? What do you want to talk about, Mom? He asked cautiously. About the changes you mentioned at dinner last Sunday. I think it's time you explain to me exactly what you have in mind. I could sense his nervousness over the phone. All right, I'll be there tomorrow around 6. That night, with David and Hope as witnesses, I discreetly set up a recording system in the living room. Everything Daniel said would be recorded as additional evidence. On Thursday afternoon, as I waited for my son to arrive, I mentally reviewed all the elements I had in my favor: complete legal protection, evidence of their fraudulent activities, certification of my mental capacity, recovered family allies, information about Sarah's secret debts, and now the ability to document any new lies or threats. When Daniel arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, he brought with him a folder of documents and an expression of determination that did not go unnoticed. He came prepared for a conversation he believed he completely controlled. He sat across from me on the same sofa where years ago I had taught him to read, where we had watched movies together on Sundays, where we had celebrated his academic achievements. But now that same room had become a battlefield where the future of our relationship and my autonomy would be decided. Mom, he began in a serious voice, I've been thinking a lot about our family and financial situation. I think it's time to make some important adjustments. I'm listening, I replied with the same calm I had used for decades in complex business negotiations. What Daniel didn't know was that every word he was about to say would later be used as evidence against him. He had completely underestimated his adversary and was about to discover the real cost of that underestimation. Mom, Daniel continued, spreading out the documents he had brought, Sarah and I have been studying your financial situation in detail. We believe there are significant optimization opportunities that you should seriously consider. I watched him attentively as he arranged the papers on the coffee table. His body language revealed nervousness, but also an artificial confidence that I found unsettling. First of all, he said, pointing to a document, this house represents an unproductive asset. It's valued at over $400,000, but it's not generating any returns. This house is my home, Daniel. You grew up here. Your father lives here. That's exactly why it makes economic sense to transfer the ownership now, while we're all in agreement. You could retain lifetime use, but the legal title would pass to my name. That would allow us to optimize future inheritance taxes. The coldness with which he described the plan to take over my house was disconcerting, but I maintained my composure. I needed him to keep talking to get the full confession on tape. "And my other investments? That's where the situation gets more complex," he replied, adopting a seemingly technical tone. "You have too much diversification for someone your age. You should consolidate everything into more conservative, easily managed instruments." He then showed me a detailed proposal where my stocks, bonds, and term deposits would be liquidated and transferred to a joint account that he would manage for my benefit. "Daniel," I said in a deliberately confused voice, "this sounds very complicated for me to understand. Could you explain it to me more simply?" I saw his eyes light up, believing he had finally found the vulnerability he was looking for. "That's why it's so important that you let me help you, Mom. These financial decisions are too complex for someone who isn't familiar with the current markets." "Are you suggesting that I'm no longer capable of managing my own affairs?" "It's not a matter of capacity," he replied quickly. "It's a matter of efficiency. I have a background in finance. Sarah understands the real estate market. We can maximize the value of your assets in ways you couldn't on your own." It was exactly the confession I needed. Daniel had implicitly admitted that his plan was to take total control of my finances under the pretext of my supposed incompetence. And what if I object to these changes? The question completely changed the dynamic of the conversation. Daniel visibly tensed and fell silent for a few eternal seconds. "Mom, we hope it won't be necessary to resort to more formal measures." "What kind of formal measures?" "There is a legal possibility of establishing a guardianship when an elderly person is not in a position to make rational financial decisions for themselves." There it was, the direct threat I had been waiting for. Daniel had just confessed, with the recorder running, that if I did not voluntarily hand over my assets, they would proceed to have me declared legally incompetent. "Have you consulted with lawyers about that?" I asked, maintaining my tone of a worried old woman. "I have obtained preliminary advice, yes. The process isn't complicated when there is clear evidence of impaired judgment." "What evidence?" Daniel opened another folder and showed me documents that left me breathless. There were photos of my house taken from the street, showing minor untidiness in the garden. There were copies of medical receipts where he had underlined my visits for minor health issues. There was even a handwritten list of concerning behaviors that included things like repeating conversations and frequent forgetfulness. "As you can see," he said with a chilling confidence, "we have documented several indicators that could concern an independent medical evaluator." "We have?" "Sarah has helped me with the documentation. Her professional experience has been invaluable in presenting the information coherently." At that moment, I fully understood the sophistication of the plan. They hadn't just decided to steal my assets, they had meticulously built a false file to legally justify their actions. "Daniel," I said, adopting a more trembling voice than usual, "this is all very overwhelming for me. Could I think about it for a few days?" "Of course, Mom, but it's important that you don't delay the decision too long. The tax optimization opportunities have deadlines." "What deadlines?" "Ideally, we should have everything formalized before the end of April. That would give us enough time to complete the transfers before the end of the fiscal year." April. Exactly the date I had seen on his secret timeline. Daniel had just confirmed that they had a specific schedule to complete the appropriation of my assets. And what if, during these days of reflection, I decided to consult with my own advisors? The question made him visibly nervous. "Mom, I think it would be counterproductive to involve more people in intimate family decisions. Besides, we've already done all the necessary research." "But surely you wouldn't object to me verifying a few details with my bank." "The problem," he replied with evident caution, "is that your bank might not fully understand the family context of these decisions. They could create unnecessary confusion." It was the final confirmation I needed. Daniel was not only afraid of me consulting with independent professionals, but he specifically wanted to prevent the bank from verifying the information they had used to obtain data on my accounts. "I understand," I said with apparent resignation. "I suppose I'll trust your judgment as I always have." I saw him relax immediately. He had interpreted my response as surrender, when in fact it was the conclusion of a perfectly executed interrogation. "Mom, I want you to know that we are doing all of this for your own good. Sarah and I have realized that you need protection, even if you don't see it yourself." "Protection from what?" "From yourself, mainly. At your age, it's natural for judgment to become gradually impaired." It's better to anticipate these problems before they become irreversible. Those last words were the jewel of the entire recording. Daniel had explicitly admitted that he considered my judgment to be compromised, providing perfect evidence of the falsehood of his motives. When he left that night, taking his documents and his veiled threats with him, I sat in the living room with a feeling of absolute triumph. I had gotten him to completely confess his real intentions, I had obtained recorded evidence of his incapacitation threats, and I had confirmed all the details of their planned timeline. But most importantly, Daniel left convinced that he had managed to intimidate and confuse me, when in reality he had provided the final evidence I needed to completely destroy his plan. That night I called Samuel Morris to inform him about the recording. "Mrs. Herrera, this is pure gold from a legal standpoint. With this confession, we can not only defend against any attempt at incapacitation, but also press criminal charges for attempted fraud and coercion." As I prepared for bed, I reflected on what I had achieved in the last 3 weeks. I had gone from being a potential victim to having complete control of the situation. My assets were legally shielded. I had exhaustive evidence of all of Daniel and Sarah's fraudulent activities. I had regained David as an ally, and now I possessed the recorded confession that would make any legal action against me impossible. But the most satisfying part was that I had achieved all of this without my adversaries even suspecting that they no longer had any advantage. They still believed they were facing a confused and vulnerable old woman, when in reality they had fallen into a trap perfectly designed by someone with decades of experience in business strategy. Tomorrow, the final phase of my plan would begin. The systematic destruction of everything they had built against me. On Friday, April 3rd, I decided it was time to shift from silent defense to calculated offense. For 3 weeks, I had been gathering information, building protections, and setting traps. Now it was time to use that entire arsenal in a devastatingly effective way. My first action was to contact Sarah's creditors directly. Gabe Harrison had provided me with their contact details, and I decided they deserved to know the true situation of their debtor. I called Nicholas Ross, the main creditor, who had invested $80,000 in Sarah's failed real estate project. "Mr. Ross," I said, "I am Emily Herrera, Sarah Moreno's mother-in-law. I think you should know that my daughter-in-law is fraudulently trying to access my estate to cover the debts she has with you." The conversation that followed was revealing. Nicholas confirmed that Sarah had repeatedly assured him she would have access to significant family resources before April 30th, the deadline she had negotiated for payment. "Mrs. Herrera, are you willing to guarantee your daughter-in-law's debts?" "Absolutely not. In fact, I recommend you carefully review any document she might present that is supposedly backed by my assets. It is highly likely they are forgeries." After hanging up, I knew I had planted the first seed of external pressure that would dramatically complicate Sarah's plans. Her creditors would now start to investigate her payment promises more deeply, and any attempt to use fraudulent documents would be immediately detected. My second action was even more direct. I personally visited the office of the lawyer Robert Sanders, who had been advising Daniel on guardianship procedures. "Mr. Sanders," I said, introducing myself in his office without an appointment, "I am Emily Herrera, and I understand my son has been consulting with you about my supposed mental incapacity." The lawyer's expression of surprise and discomfort was immediate. "Mrs. Herrera, I cannot discuss other clients' cases." "You don't need to discuss anything," I replied calmly. "You just need to see this." I handed him the complete report from Dr. Johnson, certifying my perfect cognitive ability, along with a copy of the transcribed recording of my conversation with Daniel, where he admitted to fabricating false evidence. "Mr. Sanders, my son has systematically lied to you about my mental state and my family circumstances. I suggest you carefully review any documentation he has provided you, because much of it could constitute forged evidence." The lawyer read the documents with an increasingly grave expression. "Mrs. Herrera, if this is true, there is a very serious ethical problem with the representation I have been asked to provide. I assure you it is completely true, and I anticipate that any legal procedure based on false information will be vigorously contested with all available legal tools." When I left that office, I knew that Daniel had lost his main legal advisor. No responsible lawyer would continue with a case knowing that their client had deliberately provided false information. On Monday, April 6th, I implemented the third phase of my counterattack: financial exposure. I contacted Daniel's boss directly at the consulting firm where he worked. "Mr. Harris," I said to Charles Harris over the phone, "I am the mother of Daniel Herrera, one of your consultants. I need to inform you of a situation that could affect the professional reputation of your company." I explained that Daniel had been using company time to consult lawyers, research legal procedures, and plan fraudulent asset transfer operations. I also mentioned that he had been using office resources to forge documents and carry out activities that could constitute financial fraud. "Mrs. Herrera, these are very serious accusations. Do you have evidence of what you are claiming?" "I have complete documentation of all his activities for the last 3 months. I am willing to provide it to you if you deem it necessary to investigate your employee's behavior." That conversation achieved exactly what I intended: to create additional professional pressure on Daniel just when he most needed job stability to face the impending financial problems. On Tuesday, I received a furious call from Sarah that confirmed my strategy was working perfectly. "Emily," she yelled over the phone, "what did you say to Nicholas Ross? He's now demanding additional collateral and threatening immediate legal action." I told him the truth, Sarah, that I have no intention of backing debts that you incurred without consulting me. Those aren't just my debts. They're family investments that can benefit all of us. "Family investments? When exactly did you consult me about these investments before making them?" The silence that followed was revealing. Sarah had no answer to that question because she had never considered it necessary to involve me in decisions that would affect my own assets. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have informed all my financial advisors about your attempts to fraudulently access my resources. Any document you present with my supposed authorization will be thoroughly verified. You can't do this to us. We are your family. Family doesn't steal, Sarah. Family doesn't forge documents. Family doesn't plan to have their matriarch declared incompetent to solve their own financial problems." I hung up the phone with the satisfaction of knowing that I had created panic in the enemy camp. The external pressures I had initiated were converging simultaneously on Daniel and Sarah, dramatically complicating their ability to execute their original plan. On Wednesday night, Daniel showed up at my door unannounced. His appearance was completely different from the confident man who had visited my house a few days earlier. He was disheveled, nervous, and clearly under enormous pressure. "Mom, we need to talk urgently." "About what, son?" "About the calls you've been making. About the things you've been telling people." "What calls? Don't play dumb. You know perfectly well that you've been sabotaging our plans." It was fascinating to see how the pressure had completely stripped away his facade of filial concern. He now spoke openly of our plans, without trying to disguise his true intentions. "Daniel, I have only been verifying information with professionals I have known for years. Does that bother you?" "Of course it bothers me. You are deliberately complicating a situation that could be resolved simply." "Simple for whom?" "For everyone. For the family. Including me. Especially for you." "Don't you understand we're trying to protect you from yourself?" That phrase was the climax of the entire confrontation. Daniel had completely revealed his true mindset. He genuinely believed he had the right to take control of my life and my assets against my will, justifying it as protection. "Daniel," I said with the coldest voice I could muster, "I think it's time you understood something fundamental. I don't need your protection. What I need is for you to respect my decisions and my autonomy. Your autonomy is compromised. You can't make rational decisions about complex financial matters." "According to whom?" "According to anyone who objectively observes your recent behavior." "You mean the behavior of carefully investigating the plans you designed for my estate without consulting me? Or the behavior of verifying the legality of documents that appeared with my signature without my authorization?" The look of shock on Daniel's face confirmed that he had finally understood that I knew exactly everything they had been planning. "Mom, how long have you known?" "From the beginning, Daniel. From the night of that dinner when you uttered those cruel words. That was the first time in my life I truly paid attention to who you had become." I watched his entire strategy unravel in real time before my eyes. The plan they had built for months was disintegrating because they had completely underestimated the response capacity of their main target. When he left that night, defeated and desperate, I knew I had achieved something fundamental. I had completely regained control of the situation and had put my adversaries in a desperate defensive position. The counterattack phase had been a complete success. Now it was time to prepare the final blow. The following days witnessed a desperate escalation from Daniel and Sarah that fully confirmed the correctness of my strategy. When people lose control of a situation they thought they dominated, they make mistakes that reveal their true nature. On Thursday, April 9th, David received a call that would definitively change his perspective on our son. Daniel contacted him with a proposal that left me breathless when he told me about it. "Emily," David said, trembling, "Daniel asked me to sign a document declaring that I have observed mental deterioration in you over the last few months." "What did you say?" I told him that was completely false, that your mind works perfectly. But he insisted, saying it was just a formality to protect the family. A formality? He explained that if I didn't cooperate, they would have to find alternative methods to resolve the situation. His exact words were, "Dad, you can do this the easy way or the hard way." The direct threat to his own father marked a point of no return. Daniel had crossed the line from family manipulation to explicit coercion, demonstrating how far he was willing to go. "He also said something that scared me a lot," David continued. He mentioned they had researched nursing homes in the region in case the situation got complicated. Those words chilled my blood. Not only were they planning to appropriate my assets, but they had also contemplated the possibility of putting me in an institution to remove any obstacle to their plans. On Friday, I received an unexpected visit that would confirm my worst suspicions about the true extent of their conspiracy. It was Tina Vance, David's cousin who worked at the local city hall, who had come to warn me about something disturbing. "Emily," she said with obvious concern, "Sarah was in my office yesterday asking about procedures for death certificates and post-mortem asset transfers." "Death certificates?" She said it was for a client, but when I asked for specific details, she got very nervous and changed the subject. Then she asked me about the requirements to validate wills and how long the probate process takes. The information was deeply disturbing. Sarah had not only considered having me declared incompetent, but she had also researched procedures related to my death. It was an escalation into territories I had never imagined. "Tina, did it seem to you that the questions had a specific case in mind?" "Definitely." She mentioned properties valued at several $100,000 and direct heirs who wanted to speed up the normal process. Her words struck me as very strange. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Samuel Morris. The information I had received over the last few days suggested the situation was more dangerous than I had initially estimated. "Mrs. Herrera," Samuel said after hearing everything, "this has evolved beyond a simple attempt at estate fraud. We are talking about coercion, family threats, and possibly conspiracy to commit serious crimes. What do you recommend? It's time to involve the authorities. We have enough evidence to file formal complaints for forgery of documents, attempted fraud, and family coercion. However, I had a different strategy in mind. Samuel, I want you to prepare all the legal documentation, but let's not file it yet. I prefer to use this information as leverage for a definitive resolution." On Saturday morning, my phone rang with a call I had been expecting. It was Daniel, and his voice revealed a desperation I had never heard before. "Mom, I need to talk to you immediately. It's urgent." "What kind of urgency?" "Sarah's creditors are taking legal action. They've repossessed her car and are threatening to sue her for fraud. She says you deliberately sabotaged the negotiations." I simply told them the truth about my willingness to back her debts. "Mom, Sarah is desperate. She's talked about options that scare me." "What options?" "I can't explain it over the phone. Come to the house, please. Sarah says if we don't resolve this today, she will do something we will all regret." The call confirmed that my financial pressure strategy had worked exactly as planned. Sarah's creditors were now exerting direct legal pressure, and she was in a state of complete panic. That afternoon, when I arrived at Daniel's house, I was met with a scene that surpassed all my expectations. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by legal documents, her eyes swollen from crying and an expression of absolute desperation on her face. "Emily," she said without looking up, "I need you to understand that this was nothing personal against you." "Oh, no?" "It was just a practical solution to a temporary problem. The real estate project would have worked if it hadn't been for the crisis in the sector. I needed short-term capital to avoid bankruptcy. And you decided my estate was the solution to your problem?" "I had no other options. The banks rejected all my loans. Private investors demanded collateral I couldn't provide, and so you decided to forge my signature and conspire to have me declared incompetent?" The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel stared at the floor, unable to defend the indefensible. "Sarah," I continued, "tell me exactly what desperate options you've been considering." I don't. Tina Vance told me about your visit to City Hall, asking about death certificates and probate processes. Do you want to explain what that was about?" The look of horror that crossed Daniel's face confirmed that he had not been aware of that particular investigation by his wife. "Sarah!" Daniel exclaimed. "You told me you were only looking into normal legal options." "I was exploring all possibilities," she answered defensively. "I needed to fully understand the legal landscape." "The legal landscape of my death?" I asked directly. "It wasn't that, it was just general information, but her inability to hold my gaze told me everything I needed to know." Sarah had considered scenarios that went far beyond simple asset appropriation. "Daniel," I said to my son, "do you realize how far this woman has led you? Do you understand that you participated in a conspiracy that could have ended in ways I don't even want to imagine?" Daniel covered his face with his hands. "Mom, I just wanted to. I thought we were doing the right thing for the family." "The right thing? Forging documents is the right thing? Lying to lawyers is the right thing? Threatening your own father is the right thing?" "I didn't know it had gone that far," he shouted, looking accusingly at Sarah. "You told me it was just preventive financial planning." "It was preventive," Sarah replied, "preventive before the situation became irreversible." The argument between them revealed something fundamental to me. Daniel had been manipulated by Sarah as much as the rest of us. She had gradually escalated the conspiracy, involving him step by step without ever revealing the full scope of her intentions. When I left that house that afternoon, I took with me something I hadn't expected, the certainty that Daniel was more a victim than a villain in this story. Sarah had been the true architect of the entire operation, using my son as an instrument to execute her desperate plan. That night, as I reflected on everything I had witnessed, I made a crucial decision about how to handle the final confrontation that was looming. On Sunday, April 12th, I received the call I had been waiting for days. It was Daniel, and his voice sounded completely broken. "Mom, I need to see you. Alone, without Sarah, please." "Where do you want to meet?" "At the park where you taught me to ride a bike. Remember?" The reference to that place, laden with childhood memories, told me that something fundamental had changed in his perspective. I agreed to meet him that afternoon. When I arrived at the park, I found my son sitting on the same bench where, decades ago, we had spent entire afternoons as he learned to master his first bicycle. But the man in front of me was emotionally shattered. "Mom," he began without preamble, "Sarah lied to me about everything." "What did you discover?" "Last night, after you left, we had a terrible fight," I demanded. "She explained the thing about the death certificates." At first, she denied it, but when I pressed her, she completely fell apart. Daniel covered his face with his hands before continuing. "She confessed to me that she had considered scenarios where your natural death would solve all the financial problems without any legal complications." Hearing those words from my own son's mouth brought a mixture of horror and relief. Horror at the magnitude of what Sarah had contemplated, and relief that Daniel had finally seen her true nature. "What else did she tell you?" "That the debts are much worse than she had told me. It's not $150,000. It's over $300,000. She's been forging documents for months, not just yours, but also from other clients at her real estate agency." The revelation didn't surprise me, but it confirmed that Sarah was a habitual criminal, not just a desperate woman who had made a mistake. She also confessed that she had spoken with a corrupt doctor willing to sign a certificate of mental deterioration without actually examining you. All for $20,000. "And you knew about this?" "No! I swear I knew nothing about that. I thought we were really trying to help you with financial planning." When she told me about the guardianship, she said it was just a precaution to avoid future problems. I saw real tears in my son's eyes for the first time since he was a child. "Mom, I've realized I've been living with a stranger. The woman I married doesn't exist. She's a professional manipulator who used me to get to you. How do you feel about that?" Ashamed, furious, but mostly terrified to think how far it could have gone if you hadn't discovered everything in time. The conversation continued for more than 2 hours. Daniel told me details that not even Gabe Harrison had uncovered in his investigation. Sarah had been stealing commissions from her own real estate agency, had forged documents from other clients, and had used inside information to defraud several investors. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Tell me, can you ever forgive me for everything I've done? The question went straight to my heart. For weeks, I had been furious with my son. I had planned my revenge against him. I had enjoyed watching him suffer the consequences of his actions. But sitting there, seeing a broken man who realized he had been manipulated by the person he trusted most, my perspective changed completely. Daniel, forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something that's given. And it's already been given. How can you say that after everything I've put you through? Because at the end of the day, you're still my son, and because I now understand that the real enemy was never you. That night, Daniel accompanied me home and confessed the whole truth to David. My husband cried for hours, not just from the relief of knowing his son wasn't the monster he had seemed, but from the pain of understanding how they had all been manipulated. On Monday morning, Daniel made the bravest decision of this whole nightmare. He went to the police station to formally report Sarah for all the crimes he had discovered. "Inspector Ramirez," he told the officer who took his statement, "I need to report my wife for forgery of documents, attempted fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit crimes against my mother." Daniel's report, combined with all the evidence I had gathered for weeks, created an overwhelming criminal case against Sarah. But the most devastating blow for her was losing her main accomplice and defense witness. That same afternoon, the police executed a search warrant on Daniel's house and Sarah's office. What they found surpassed all our expectations. Complete files of multiple scams, forged documents, correspondence with the corrupt doctor, and detailed plans to defraud not only our family but several other clients as well. On Tuesday, Sarah was arrested at her office in front of all her colleagues. The charges included aggravated fraud, forgery of public documents, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. The district attorney's office estimated that the sentences could add up to 15 years in prison. When Daniel called to tell me about the arrest, his voice was different. For the first time in months, he sounded like the son I remembered from years ago. "Mom, I want you to know something important." "What?" Throughout all these months, deep in my heart, I knew something was wrong. But I was afraid to admit it, because it would mean my marriage was a lie, that my life was a lie. And now? Now I'd rather live with the painful truth than with a comfortable lie. And the truth is, I almost destroyed the most important person in my life for someone who never truly loved me. That night we had dinner together for the first time since that fateful dinner on March 15th that had started this whole nightmare. But now the atmosphere was completely different. David had made the pot roast that Daniel loved so much, and for the first time in weeks, I could see a genuine smile on my son's face. "Mom," he said as we finished dinner, "there's something I need to tell you." "I'm listening." "For all these weeks while I thought I was protecting you, you were actually the one protecting all of us. You discovered the truth, you developed a strategy, and you saved us from a catastrophe we didn't even see coming. I only did what any mother would have done. No, Mom. You did what only someone with your experience, your intelligence, and your love for family could have done. You saved us from ourselves." As I listened to him, I realized I had achieved something more important than protecting my assets or proving my mental capacity. I had gotten my son back, and I had saved my family from total destruction. The war was over, but the scars would take time to heal. However, for the first time in weeks, I was certain that we would heal together, as a real family, without lies or manipulations. The final chapter of this story was yet to be written, and for the first time in a long time, I knew it would have a happy ending. 6 months after Sarah's arrest, my life had found a balance I had never imagined possible. It was October 2024, and as I watched the golden leaves fall in my garden, I reflected on everything we had been through as a family. Sarah's trial had concluded in September with a sentence of 12 years in prison. The charges of multiple fraud, document forgery, and criminal conspiracy were irrefutable, thanks to all the evidence we had collected. But the most satisfying part wasn't seeing her pay for her crimes, but witnessing how the truth had freed my family from her lies. Daniel had initiated divorce proceedings immediately after the arrest. The process was quick, given that Sarah was in prison and couldn't contest anything. My son had gradually regained his dignity and peace of mind, although the emotional scars would take years to fully heal. "Mom," he had told me a few weeks ago, "every day that passes, I realize more things she manipulated in our relationship. Decisions I thought were mine, opinions I thought I had formed independently. It's terrifying to discover how much of your own life wasn't really yours." The rebuilding process had been gradual but steady. Daniel had sold the house he shared with Sarah and had rented a small apartment near us. Sundays had once again become family days, but now with a completely different dynamic, based on absolute honesty and mutual respect. David had undergone his own transformation during these months. The guilt of having been an accomplice, albeit an unwilling one, to the conspiracy had led him to therapy. With professional help, he learned to recognize the manipulation techniques used against him and developed a new emotional strength. "Emily," he confessed to me one night as we walked in the garden, "for 40 years of marriage, I thought I knew you completely. But these last few months have shown me aspects of your character I had never seen. The way you handled that whole crisis was extraordinary. I just did what I had to do to protect our family. No, you did much more than that. You stayed calm when I was hysterical. You thought strategically when we were reacting emotionally. And most importantly, you never lost compassion for Daniel, even when you believed he was your enemy." My relationship with my sister Rebecca had strengthened enormously. Her help during the most difficult times had been invaluable, and now we visited each other regularly. I had regained not only my immediate family but also family connections that had been dormant for years. My professional relationship with Samuel Morris had evolved into a genuine friendship. The asset shield we had implemented remained active. Not out of distrust for my restored family, but as a preventive measure against any future external threats, Mrs. Herrera, Samuel had said during our last meeting. "Your case has become a model study in my firm on how to handle complex family crises. The combination of preventive legal protection, meticulous investigation, and strategic patience was exemplary. The financial aspect had an unexpectedly positive outcome. The assets Sarah had stolen from other clients were partially recovered thanks to our investigation. As a reward for providing crucial evidence, I received a significant financial compensation, which I decided to donate entirely to an education fund for vulnerable youth. If anything good can come out of this experience, I had explained to Daniel, it's that other young people will have genuine opportunities to build honest lives. The biggest transformation had been in my own perspective on aging and vulnerability. For 67 years, I had built my identity around being a provider and protector. The crisis had shown me that those roles don't disappear with age. They evolve into more sophisticated forms. Before all this, I reflected during a recent family dinner. I thought getting older meant becoming gradually more dependent. Now I understand that accumulated experience can be the most powerful weapon we have against those who try to take advantage of us. Daniel had found a new professional purpose. He had left his consulting job and had begun to specialize in advising on the prevention of family fraud. His personal experience, though painful, had given him unique credibility to help other families. "Mom, every week I get calls from elderly people who suspect their relatives are plotting something against them. Being able to use what I learned from you to help them makes me feel like all this pain served a positive purpose." The most visible change had been in the dynamic of our Sunday dinners. There were no more hidden tensions, forced conversations, or ulterior motives. Daniel brought desserts from different bakeries he discovered during the week. David prepared experimental dishes he found in cooking magazines, and I told anecdotes from my business years that I had never shared before. "You know what I value most about these Sundays?" Daniel had asked me a few weeks ago. "What?" "That for the first time in years when we talk, everyone says exactly what they think. There are no hidden agendas, no manipulation, no fear. Just a real family having real conversations. The deepest lesson I had drawn from the whole experience was about the importance of staying vigilant without losing the capacity to love. For decades, I had trusted my family blindly, assuming that love guaranteed loyalty. Now I understood that true love includes the responsibility to protect those you love, even from themselves. One afternoon, while organizing papers at my desk, I found the notebook where I had initially documented all the evidence of the conspiracy. I reread my notes from those first weeks of investigation and was surprised to remember the fear and confusion I had felt then. If I could send a message to that woman from March, I thought, I would tell her to trust her instincts, not to underestimate her own ability, and to remember that life experience is the most valuable resource we have. That night during dinner, I decided to share a final reflection with my family. "Daniel, David, I want you to know something important. These months have been the hardest of my life, but also the most revealing. They taught me that true family strength doesn't come from avoiding conflicts, but from facing them together, with total honesty. "What do you mean?" David asked. "That I'm no longer afraid of getting older. Throughout this crisis, I proved to myself as much as to you that age hasn't weakened me, it has refined me. Every year of experience was a tool I used to protect what I love most." Daniel raised his wine glass. "To Mom, who taught us that wisdom is not just knowing what to do, but when to do it and how to do it without losing your soul in the process." As we toasted that night, looking toward a future that no longer scared me, I knew I had achieved something more valuable than protecting my assets. I had transformed a devastating betrayal into an opportunity to build stronger, more authentic family relationships. The story was over, but life went on, and for the first time in decades, I was excited to find out what would come next.